I want to share with you a sermon today. I think this would be more of a, I guess you would have to call touch the heart or motivate the spirit. Over the last 7 years, we spent a lot of time, as you know, into a timeline series trying to cover the events. And so now we come into the stage where it looks like God's given us a lot of what we really need to know for the time frame we live into where we're going. And I feel compelled to go into the scriptures and search out what we need inside of us to have the spirit that's going to carry us into that promised land. So I knew at some point in time we'd have to cover Joshua and Caleb, because those are the two spies who went in that God blessed and brought them into the promised land. So last week I was flipping around the TV and I heard a pastor on TV and he says he wanted to talk about Caleb. Well, certainly that caught my attention because that's where my mindset was. And he went into a direction I never went into before. So as my mind went in one direction, he went into another direction. I'm focused on where we need to be with going to the kingdom. So I want to share with you something that came to my enlightenment last week. And I think you'll find it interesting also. So when you think of Caleb, he doesn't fall into the category of a lesser-known character of the Bible. And from time to time, I do lesser-known characters of the Bible that are seen to be hidden or tucked away. But here I'm going to share with you something about Caleb. There's the picture of the story. We know that he had the courage to be able to stand up and say, let us go in and take this land. But there's a whole lot more that God's left there that I never considered before, and I'm going to share with you that today. Look what God says in Numbers 14, verse 24. He says, because my servant Caleb has a different spirit and follows me wholeheartedly. So the beginning of our story to understand the legacy of courage of Caleb and how it applies for us today in the duality of events is I cover the former and the latter, the physical and the spiritual, to understand that what God has left for us, he will use again. 1 Corinthians 10 tells us that all of these things, talking about the children of Israel, were left for our admonition so we don't make the same mistakes. So when we look at that scripture from the New Testament, we go back to the Old Testament, all of the events from the promises to Abraham that your family is going to go to a land that's not theirs and serve for 400 years, and afterwards I will bring them out and they will come back and serve God on that mount. All of those things apply to that principle of the New Testament, 1 Corinthians. And this is simply one more part of that example. So let's get into that. Today, in many aspects of our lives and what God requires of us, we find ourselves in much the same way as the Israelites were as they were about to enter the promised land. Because in fact, isn't that what we're doing? Aren't we waiting for the kingdom of God? Isn't that what the apostles in the time of the children in the New Testament said, will you at this time restore the kingdom? What they didn't realize, it wasn't the physical kingdom that was going to be restored. God was talking about a spiritual kingdom or a promised land for a later day. That time is right at our doorstep today. And I don't know how anybody can look at the conditions around the world and look at all the prophecies that are laid out, how they're all coming to pass at one time. And if you didn't get a chance to see our News Nuggets and Insights, I invite you to go online and look up yesterday's News Nuggets and Insights. In it, we talk about that there's 4 videos that we talk about a priest, believe it or not, who stands up for what he understands the scriptures to be and what he thought the church stood by, till the following day when the Pope came out and said it's okay to have a cohabiting of the homosexuals and they should be included with families, friends, and church. Well, this priest the day before in this segment of 26 minutes, he talked about how they need to stand up for the courage to stand up for serving God, his freedom of religion, and what's the issues of the election today? Abortion and homosexuality. The 3 principles: no abortion, no homosexuality, and the freedom of religion. Well, just one day later, as we brought that program out, on Wednesday, the Pope comes out and says, no, we need to begin accepting those people. And it's turned the world upside down. It really, really has. But what that has done now, it has now given way to begin to move through into the time when Jesus Christ talked about it will be as in the days of Sodom and Gomorrah. That is the beginning stage. And if you'll see, and I'll carry that into next week's News Nuggets and Insights. So here we are. We're there. We're looking at the promised land, waiting for the return of Jesus Christ. The lessons from Caleb are numerous. All right, how many people know Shamua? My hand wouldn't have went up either. How about Shaphath? They're in the Bible. How about Ilgal and Palti and Gedaliah, Gedai, Jermeliel, Sreth, Nabai? I wish they used English languages. If you count them, there's 10 of them. Those are the spies. God listed them by name. Now, if I'd have told you these two at first, you'd have probably figured those right off the bat. Then, of course, there was Caleb and Joshua. There were one from each of the 12 tribes. We're going to go into the promised land. So here we have the story of two. Those who had the courage to trust what God said, and those who fear took over of what's going on there. The Bible gives us specific reasons for the differences and why the 10 of them failed, and 10 chose to live in what's called the safe zone, while Joshua and Caleb chose to live in the risk zone. Where do you live today? You play it safe? Yesterday in our News Nuggets and Insights, when we took in that first segment, there's about a 20-minute segment where we use that Catholic priest and showing where the world is, that even the Catholic priest who had the courage to stand up. I asked everyone to do something. I said, I'd like for you to take the courage now to take at least this segment and share it with a friend or a family member. In other words, bring it to their attention. Step outside your safe zone and move into the risk zone. Their mission was found in Numbers chapter 13. So now let's go back and let's refresh. We kind of know the story, don't we? We've all been there before. You probably in Sunday school when you were little, you read the story of the spies who went into the promised land. And what's one of the biggest things that we remember when we were kids? You got these two guys carrying one hanging grape cluster, just power of the size of these grapes, right? So that's all part of the story. That's all part of the story. But more specifically, where they found the grapes. So when you go back into it, and even the time, which I'm not going to get into today, the time of the grapes, God shows us, if they're carrying these grapes out, was around tabernacles. Moving into the promised land, like you and I, pictures the end time of God's plan, the Feast of Tabernacles, showing the kingdom of God. At that time of year, we move into the promised land, which comes right after the return of Jesus Christ. So they're carrying these clusters. So God not only shows us what they were, shows us the blessings where they were, but He also gives us the timing of when it took place. Going through that. All right, so let's read verse 17. So Moses sent them to spy out the land of Canaan, and he said to them, "Get you up this way southward and go to the mountain and see the land, what it is, and the people who dwells therein, whether they are strong or weak, few or many, and what the land is that they dwell in, whether it's good or bad, and what the cities that they dwell in, whether in tents or in strongholds, and what the land is, whether it be fat or lean, whether there be wood therein or not. And be of good courage, and bring the fruit of the land, because now is the time of the first ripe grapes." So God puts that in there for a reason, to tell you that when all these things take place in the duality of events at the end time, it's picturing the time that's going to come following the return of Jesus Christ, that you're going to go into the promised land. So that's their mission. Come back and give an honest report. Verse 21. So they went up. They searched the land from the wilderness of Sin unto Rehob, and the men came to Hamath. And as they ascended south, they came to Hebron. Now, I put Hebron in a different color because this plays a vital role to the story of Caleb, whether we realize it or not. At this point, it has no significance other than to understand that there is Hebron. So we'll come back to that toward the end of the story today, where Ahiman, Sheshai, Talmai, the children of Anak. Now, who are the children of Anak? These are giants. Anak, the children of Anak. Anaks were the giants. So here's a land in Hebron that dwelt the giants of the land. Now, Hebron was built 7 years before Zoan in Egypt. This is also the land that God gave to Abraham. So that helps bring it into more context. So here we have a land that's really rich. It seems to be the prime land. Like if you were going to go put your place of property in the mountains or in a country, what you're looking for, the prime spot to put it. Excuse me. So here we are, that God had given this to Abraham. So now we see it's occupied by the giants. Why the giants? Because they were the strongest in the land. No one's going to challenge to take away the prime piece of property from them. If you was in real estate, what they call it? Location, location, location. It was the richest land in the valley. All right, going on. So they came to the brook of Eshcol, and they cut down there a branch with one cluster of grapes. Now, we show that in the pictures. We talk about that all the time, that it was so big that it took 2 men to carry one cluster of grapes. Just to give you an idea what land could produce if we were living according to the principles of God. But this land God had preserved, they gave to Abraham, so it was the richest. And they bare it between 2 on a staff, and they brought of the pomegranates and of the figs. And the place was called the brook of Eshcol because of the cluster of the grapes which the children of Israel had got down from thence. So there's the story. Everything God said, everything he told them in Egypt before he brought them out was there. They saw it with their own eyes. No problem. Or you would think there'd be no problem. Isn't that what God tells you and I? I will never leave you or forsake you. The spirit I give you, I will stay with you until Christ comes back. No harm will come nigh thy dwelling. All these promises God gives us. When we look at the news, we look at the events, and we think about what's coming, where do you stand? Which eyes do we look at? The eyes of the 10 or the 2? What I'm talking about now. Then they returned from searching the land after 40 days. Now they're ready to enter the promised land. To enter the promised land required taking risk. They couldn't play it safe. They had to go forward. You know, from time to time in my life, I worked for other companies. You know, a lot of my life, I just worked for myself because I just found it easier to work for myself and do it that way than to have to be locked down to working for other people. And sometimes when you work for other people, you play it the safe zone. Like you're really afraid to tell them that I don't need the holy days off. Or you need to keep the Sabbath day. Especially for new people who's coming in who need to develop that faith, to realize that I can't work on the Sabbath day and to trust God. And I've known many people who couldn't make that decision and had to go back. We don't understand that story. That's between them and God. I'm talking about you and I today. Those who've been called to look inside what's coming in the promised land. The spies were the advanced team. Whether we realize it or not, if we forget about it from time to time, and being scattered across the country in little small pockets of people, we sometimes forget we are the spies in this world that belongs to Satan. We ought to bring the report, like the spies were, to those that God calls out of this world. Part of the destiny of the Israelites was dependent upon the report of these leaders. Matthew 24:22 says, except those days should be shortened, there should no flesh be saved. But for the elect's sake, those days shall be shortened. In other words, what happens at the end time, whether we realize it or not, you play a vital role. What happened with the children of Israel, the spies played a vital role. The report they gave, the people would build on or they would move away from. Because you got to remember, when you go back into the beginning of the chapter, God told them to pick leaders. picked the heads of families. These were the people that they looked to for leadership, for guidance, for counseling, for strength, for support. These are the people that you can trust that are going to bring them and care for the family. That's the kind of leadership that God's calling in you and I. Because you see, when new people come out of this world, they're going to be the walking wounded. They're not going to be those who come out. He doesn't call the mighty, the powerful, and the statue. Not many. Most of the people simply just like you and I. Those that God has called who's going to receive his truth. So what was the problem? 10 of the spies chose to live in that safe zone. And they brought back what God calls an evil report. Their failure can be broken down into 3 specific points. 1, they maximized the opposition. They saw that was out there and they focused on the problem, not the solution. They maximized the opposition. 2, they minimized the opportunity. God had given them something that he hadn't given anybody else up to that time. Kind of like you and I. I think I'm getting a little cold, so my throat's a little dry. I get a tickle right now. So bear with me on this. They minimized the opportunity. So at that time, they looked at the problem rather than the blessing. And 3, they compromised the objective. They compromised the objective. Excuse me 1 second. All right, so now let's break these 3 down. 1, maximizing the opposition. This is in Numbers. It says, and they told him when they came back to the land where you sent us, surely it does flow with milk and honey, and this is the fruit. Nevertheless, the people be strong that dwell there in the land, and the cities are walled and very great. Moreover, we saw the children of Anak. So they're talking about all the giants who were there, and the Amalekites that dwell in the land of the south, and the Hittites, the Jebusites, the Amorites. They all dwell in the mountains, and the Canaanites by the sea, and by the coast of the Jordan. You find the story in Numbers chapter 13, if you go looking for it. So surely God says what he told us is true. However, these are the yeah buts. Yeah, he told us, yeah, but, we're not going in there. They got a lot of people in there. You see, this world, it's a lot of people out there. And they don't want God's people in it. Going on. So Caleb stilled the people. This is verse 30. So Caleb stilled the people before Moses and said, let us go up at once and possess it, for we are able to overcome it. So here we have the 2 reports. One built on faith, one built on fear. Here's the story. Now let's take that response. They maximized the opposition. This is the men's response to Caleb. Caleb's tried to still everybody and settle them down and say, listen, we can do this. We're going to go in. We can take this land. He remembered what God did. He remembered how they just came out of Egypt, how God destroyed Egypt, wiped out their gods, brought them through the sea, closed the sea on them. And he says, we can go and take this land. But this is the response, 31 through 33. In just 2 verses, just 2 short verses, these 10 men brought out 7 points that scared the Israelites to death. What do you share with those around you? Do you share with them the fear that's coming or the hope that's inside you? We need to focus on that hope that's inside us, because the fear is going to overtake this world, and they're going to need to see a light. They need to see a Caleb in each one of us. So here's the 2 verses. 1, but the men that went up with him said, 1, we are not able to go up against these people. Now I'm reading the verse by verse, sentence by sentence, but watch the points I'll put with each one. 2, for they are stronger than we. 3, there should be a 3. Is a land that devours up the inhabitants thereof, and all the people that we saw in it are men of great stature, maximizing the opposition. All right, that's what they're doing here. 4, the people that we saw are men of great stature. 5, we saw giants. So everything they're telling the people did nothing but scare them to death. Because remember, they've been out there for 40 years in the safe zone. They've been walking around the desert. They didn't even have to go out and hunt for food. They got up in the morning, they go out and look in the field, and they go pick up the manna, and they bring it back and they were safe, and they had food. So God provided for them every step of the way. But now they couldn't do that. Now they're going to go out, and they're going to have to test their faith. 6, the sons of Anak, which come from the giants, are there. And 7, and so we were in our own sight as grasshoppers, and so we were in their eyesight. In other words, man, they got people everywhere. These people are big. They're giants. They got fortified cities. These are powerful people. We look like grasshoppers next to them. Now, put something in here. I don't think I ever used this story. I'm going to give you my example of playing football. I was always heavy my whole life. So I'm on a football team. I'm on the line. You know, I'm a tackle. I'm a guard, a center. I'm where everybody runs over you. Because you all are blocking. The guy running behind you is going to make points. The guy who's coming after the guy who's got the ball is running over you this way. Well, one of the fields we had to travel into the country to play this team like a terrebonne. These guys are from the country. These are guys throwing hay bales and riding cattle. I mean, so when we went out there, these guys were giants. So we walked out on the field first. And then when they came out, I looked across the field and heard everybody in our side go, "Oh, man." And I went like, "Oh, my goodness, look how big these people are." These were giants. We were defeated before we stepped on the field. Nobody wanted to go out there and play these guys. I remember that story well. It's like, scared me to death when I looked at these guys. And I said, and I'm the guy in the middle. And sure enough, I got run over. I had cleats on my back. You know, it's like, send me, Lord. I'm in there saying, Coach, take me out. Take me out. It wasn't for me. So I understand what the people were going through. Needless to say, I don't know what the score was, but it wasn't good. It was bad. It was really, really bad. I only played 1 year, so I'm not doing this again. This is not fun. But I wanted to share that with you. I don't know if you've ever been through that before, too. So while I'm here, I'll take another moment to tell you about my boxing career. I lived next door to a boxer. He was Golden Gloves for the state. This guy was awesome. And he was always being picked on by the neighborhood bullies. I grew up in the 9th Ward. They were thugs. I mean, they were criminal thugs where I grew up. In fact, most of my friends today are dead or in jail from where I grew up down there. Clayton will tell you about that. He's in the lower 9th Ward. There are more thugs down there, too. So I watched this guy, one of the biggest guys in the gang, kept picking on this guy, Johnny. He was lightweight. And he kept saying, leave me alone. I don't want to fight you. I don't want to fight you. Well, they wouldn't let him. One day they pushed him too far. And I'm telling you, when he let loose, there was blood flying. Within 30 seconds, the fight was over. This little guy beat the biggest guy in our gang to a pulp. He lived next door to me. I said, I want to learn how to do that. So I went to the gym. The problem is, if you know boxing, they put you in weight classes. So I'm in there with these guys who are in shape, and they big to fit my weight class. So I trained for 3 months to lose weight, to get in shape. My first round was a sparring match. Now, the guys you're sparring with are not supposed to hit you that hard. You're getting in there, you just get learning. Well, I got lucky, and I laid a punch on him. The problem was he got really mad. Next thing I know, there was blood flying off of me. I had broken nose. The ring going, bing, 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 stop the fight, stop the fight. I got out the ring. I went home and said, I'm not doing that again. So as you can see, physical fighting is not my cup of tea. So I wanted to share that with you too, because I thought that was a funny story. I worked for 3 months hard to get in that ring. Didn't take less than 3 minutes. I was done. I said, I'm not doing this again. This is not fun. This is not fun. I'm going to walk in faith. I don't know why I brought that story in, but it seemed like it would fit with the football, so I wanted to share that with you. So now, let's look at the response to Caleb's statement, brings us to point 2. Right? So their response was all those things. The 2 verses, step by step, show all the reasons why they couldn't go in and take the land. So it brings to 2. They minimized their opportunity. Because they didn't trust God, they thought what they had to do rather than trusting what God was going to do for them. Let's take a look at that. They minimized the opportunity. As you see that in Numbers 14, all the congregation lifted up their voice and they cried. And the people wept all night, and all the children of Israel murmured against Moses and against Aaron. And the whole congregation said to them, would that God had we died in Egypt, or would God had died in the wilderness. We could have just died in Egypt and just let us die in the wilderness. Why are you going to put us through this? So they're angry with God, and they're angry with Moses. And wherefore has God brought us into this land to fall by the sword, and that our wives and our children should be a prey, were it not better for us to return to Egypt. There's another point here, which is a side note. You can't use your family as the excuse not to follow God. See, they use the family. So, oh no, our kids, we can't let our kids and wives go through this. Truth was they were scared. And so they use that as an excuse. And sometimes people in the church, well, if I go, I can't do this because my wife's going to get mad or my husband's going to be mad at me. Sometimes you have to trust God that if you walk in faith, that your faith can turn your mate or your family member. After a period of time, they'll understand what you're doing, you believe in. You're not doing this out of spite. It is something that God has called you to, something you believe in, the faith He has put inside of you, and it turns those around you. So now, 3, they compromised their objective. They compromised the objective. The 10 men who refused to trust God all died. Numbers 14, verse 37. And even those men that did bring up the evil report upon the land died by the plague before the Lord. Everyone of age of accountability who believed the evil report, they also died. Not only did those who brought the report, if you believe the evil report rather than trusting God, they died also. That's important to remember. That's very, very important to remember. Look at Numbers 14, verse 29. He said, your carcasses shall fall in this wilderness, and all that were numbered of you, according to the whole number, from 20 years old upward, which have murmured against me. But your little ones, which you said should be a prey, them will I bring in, and you shall know the land, and they shall know the land which you despised. You use that for the excuse. He says, I'm going to bring them in, God says. You aren't going to go. They're going to go into the land. That's the story that we know. But now you put it into context to tell you why it didn't work and what happened, and how we could fall into the same traps in the years that come. You know, when you look at what's going on out there and you're with the news, it is the most, I don't know how to describe it, as some of the most frustrating times I have ever seen in my lifetime. Everywhere you go and the people that you listen to, it's just absolute problems, doubt, despise, anger, and fighting and bickering with people. It's like there's no peace out in the world anymore. And God said He was going to remove that peace. And this is only the beginning of things that's going to come. I believe 2020 is the year, as I've stated before, that this is the dividing of time and the time of God's church to let us know that we need to get ready for the beginning of the time of the wearing out of the saints, because it wears you out. When I came back from the Feast of Tabernacles, and I didn't get to go to each of the feast sites like I tried to go to this year because there weren't enough flights or because of COVID or whatever the reasons were. Everywhere I went was just constant frustration with everyone. Just everywhere you went. So now let's take a look at that promised land. The children lost sight of their objective by taking their eyes off of the prize. They were going to the promised land. The people saw the promised land. They brought them back the report and said, everything God told us is true. Isn't that amazing? Everything God told them was true, and they didn't trust God to fulfill his commitment. The point? Unbelief forfeits opportunity. Unbelief forfeits opportunity. If you don't believe God can do what he says he's going to do for you, he won't. In other words, you've got an opportunity. If you're understanding any of this truth, then God has called you out of this world to have you a part of being the first, the elect, the first fruits, the spies in this line to go into the promised land. But you got to believe that. That means that no matter what happens to you from this day forward, you have to trust God to believe he's going to fulfill his commission. Even if it's through a struggling route, like the children of Israel. It took them 40 years to get rid of those who doubt to bring them in to the promised land. Faith is required to live in the risk zone. And thus we know when Jesus Christ says, when the Son of Man comes, will he find faith? That's what it's going to take. Your strength isn't going to do it. The knowledge is not going to get you in there. 7 years of the timelines putting together all that knowledge and information God's blessed this church to have isn't going to get you there. This is what's going to get you there. Faith in Jesus Christ. Your trust. Your trust in Jesus to get you into the promised land. How many people here know Florence Chadwick? She lived in 1918 and 1995. Well, I didn't know her either until last week. That was brought to my attention. Florence Chadwick was an American long-distance swimmer. An American long-distance swimmer. In 1950, she was the first woman to swim the English Channel in both directions. And she also, by the way, set records in the time of which she swam. But I want to bring to you a different story now of her. It was in 1952 that she was the first woman to swim from Catalina, with the islands off of California, to California. This was a story that I found online talking about her experience of swimming from Catalina to California. It says in 1952, Florence attempted to swim the 26 miles, by the way, between Catalina and the California coastline. As she began, she was flanked by small boats that watched for sharks. California's got a lot of sharks. So as she began swimming, they put boats around her to keep the sharks away from her so that she could swim. And they prepared to help her if she got hurt or grew tired. After about 15 hours, a thick fog set in. So now she couldn't exactly see where she was going. Florence began to even doubt her own ability. And as she told her mother, who was in one of the boats, she didn't think she could make it. She swam for another hour before asking to be pulled out, unable to see the coastline due to the fog. So now she'd been swimming over 16 hours. As she sat in the boat, she found out that she had stopped swimming just 1 mile away from her destination. The fog clouded her vision. She couldn't see her objective. Wow, what an amazing story. That's what happened to the children of Israel. I want you to remember that story in the children of Israel in your life from this day going forward, because you see, you're going to have those challenges. Those fogs are going to set in. It goes on. 2 months later, she tried again. The same thick fog set in, but she succeeded in reaching Catalina. She said that she kept a mental image of the shoreline in her mind while she swam. No matter where you go, remember the story of Caleb, Florence Chadwick, that you have to keep a vision of your objective, the kingdom of God. Spend time reading the scriptures, talking about how great, how glorious God's going to be. I was answering a question to someone this week that something came to my mind. By the way, she made it the second time. The fog came in again. It didn't faze her. She just kept swimming because she knew this time she was going to make it. And she did. She set a record. She set a record pace in time also. I was going through and answering a question that came in about the 144,000 this week. And I don't know that it's true or not, but when I read in, I believe it's Revelation 14 and Revelation 7, at the end time, God says there's going to be 12,000 people from each of the tribes that he's going to seal. And he says when he begins this, whenever this plague was about to begin, he said, well, stop. Before you do, go out and seal. And he mentions the 12 tribes and the 12,000 from each tribe. Well, that tells us the end time that modern day Israel, they're still there. They're just scattered all over the place. And when you get to Revelation 14, you see the 144,000. It appears to be the same wording as in 7. But who are those 144,000? What they're doing? They're serving at the throne of God. So I began thinking, I said, wow, is it possible that not only would that last generation be the generation who's alive, which could be you and I? Because they said they have not, they have not known woman, they didn't know all these gods. But when you're forgiven by God, all those things are forgotten. He's forgotten them all. And you're there as a pure person before God with Jesus Christ and the Holy Spirit inside of you. Is it possible the last generation, you and I, could be a part of that 144,000 that are sealed, that can serve God? He says, he who is last will be first, right? And he said, who as much is required, much is given. And I started thinking, so is it possible that you and I, in this generation, that out of those being called right now, who are not only going to be here to help serve the innumerable multitude, that God's going to grant us a position to serve with him at his throne? Think about that. What an objective that would be to keep in mind when the fog sets in. I don't know that that's true, but it sure seems to appear that it could be. I saw, wow, what an opportunity God has given that last generation. And if we are the last generation, you're going to be required a lot of you, honestly, when you see what's coming in. But is it possible God's got that in store for us too? Think about it. I brought it up in the last sermon that last generation doesn't have to die. They're transformed from physical to spirit. So, wow. And then it's possible to be able to serve that throne of God? That's amazing when you think about that. So entering the promised land, Caleb's courage now. Now let's take about, that was all the negative side. Now let's go look at the positive side. Caleb's courage. So Caleb stilled the people before Moses, and he said, let us go up at once and possess it, for we are well able to overcome it, he said. But the men that went with him said, we can't go against these people, for they are stronger than we. They were defeated before they ever began the first battle. They compromised the objective. The objective was to move into the promised land. To obtain the blessing of that objective required to take chances and to live in the risk zone. Or to put it in our terms today, it meant to trust God and move forward in faith. I remember when we bought, I don't want to ramble too long, but I got a few minutes here. When we bought this building, it wasn't what you're looking at today. Clayton is laughing. Edgar's laughing. How many were here when we first went and looked at the building on the first, before we moved in? Gilbert, Clayton, Bobby. Most of that generation, believe it or not, they died. That generation's, there were a lot of elderly people working in this building. We had I spent almost 2 years myself looking for a place to buy or to move into or to rent when this came up. But eventually when we found it, it had been sold a year before, and they started working this side of the building. They had fixed. But when you went anywhere else in the building, it was a termite-infested wreck. Every beam in this building, every stud had to be changed. It was that rotten. I mean, we came in, Harold was in here with blowtorches, blowing and burning up here, and snap, crackle, pop termites everywhere. I remember shoveling them in bags. That's how many there were. They were on my arms after. I had to go pull them up my arm. They were eating in my skin. Just the termites alone. 2 years it took us to remodel this. But it was during a time, believe it or not, that the churches of God were falling apart between 1995 and 1997. The worldwide was collapsing. All of the smaller churches were collapsing. Even the Protestant churches were beginning to separate. And through it all, God had found this place to move into. Like the children of Israel, we had to make a decision. I believe when I walked here, there was a piece of God in it. So when we asked the brethren to come over to meet, I told them a specific way to see the building. I said, when you come over now, because I didn't want them to see that side of the building first. That would have been the Anacs and the Giants and all the problems. So when they came in this direction from the expressway and they pulled up, the building looked really nice. So in the parking lot, and I got here and then almost everybody was here. We came over after church. And I hear everybody in the parking lot saying, well, this is a pretty nice place. And I'm walking around going, oh, wait till they open that door. When they open that door. And you heard the story of my mother-in-law who was here. When they opened the door, she said, Tom has lost his ever-loving mind. It was a mess. It stunk. I mean, it was rotted out. I mean, things hanging off of walls. I mean, I have to show you the pictures for you to believe what it was. The congregation had to make a decision. Can we do this or not? And everybody walked around with them, check all the time you want, look at all. And then the congregation started saying the same thing I felt. You know, it feels like there's a peace here. When they began to say they felt like they had a peace here, I knew that God had opened up their minds and their hearts to feel what I had felt. And we went back the next Saturday, and we talked about it, and they said, we can do this. Had we not done that, I don't think we would have a work today. I don't know what we'd have been doing, or would have been doing something else, but God began to open the door for us to be able to begin to build, to do a work to prepare us for an end time. And it worked. It took us 2 years. We put in over 400 sheets of sheetrock. We did demolitions for material. Every step of the way, we had no money. They would need supplies. I didn't have any money. Somebody would donate something. God brought people who donated to this congregation over $60,000 of money and materials who are not in the church, who said, I want to help with your project. And God began to open the door. And that's how we began to do this work. Had we not done like Caleb and trusted God, we'd have said, this is way too big for us to handle. And we would have stopped. And we didn't. We trusted God. And praise Him for it, because you look at what's going on today and the people that we're reaching. I personally believe that we're only in the beginning of the reason God gave us this building to begin to do an outreach. When you look at what was going on in our feast this year, our largest site, Florida, was taken away. Our largest income for the feast was Florida, was taken away. But thanks to everybody who was online and God has been blessed with, the income came in regardless. In other words, God says, you trust me, I will work it out. And here we are now ready to continue to go another year, to work harder this year to do an outreach. When the last Holy Day offering came in from the Daytona Beach site, I sat with Audrey and I said, you know, I don't understand what God has for us right now, but He's blessed us with the income. I said, whenever He's done this, there's always a job that's in the works. I don't know what that job is, but I trust that He'll give it to us. So I'm telling you today, I believe God is giving us a job. And that job's going to be able to reach more people. And He's already given us the income to go do it. It's unbelievable how God works with that. And it's trusting God. And I'm saying this to give God the praise, not to give it to us. Because He's the one who's walking us every step of the way. And it's been that way since we found the building till it is today. Now, let's go forward. Numbers 4:13. He said, because all those men which have seen my glory and my miracles, which I did in Egypt in the wilderness, have tempted me now these 10 times, and they have not hearkened to my voice. He says, surely they shall see the land which I swore to their fathers, and neither shall any of them provoke me see it. Numbers 14:24, but my servant Caleb, because he had another spirit within him. He had the Spirit of God. He trusted God. And hath followed me fully. Him will I bring into the land wherein he went, and his seed shall possess it. Numbers 14:30 says, doubtless you shall come to the land concerning which I swore to take you to dwell in, save Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, and Joshua, the son of Nun. So God's trying to tell us that if you're going to get to the promised land, you're going to have to do it the way God's telling us to do it. Caleb's courage never dimmed or abated. Now we're going to pick up the story 45 years later. Watch what else Caleb does that I didn't understand till last week. Now, you might already know this, and I tell people this all the time. I'm a little slow. I'll see something in the Bible. I'll be so excited. In order to come over, and she'll look at it and say, that church has always taught that. She'll go walk away. It's like, okay. I just found out. Joshua 14 says, the children of Judah came to Joshua in Gilgal and Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, the Kenizzite, and said, he says, you know the thing that the Lord said unto Moses, the man of God, concerning me in Kadesh Barnea. Here's a conversation 45 years later, and he's going back to Joshua. He says, remember when Moses was talking to God about me? Wow, think about that. I just read over that. I've read that story before, but it hit me all of a sudden. I said, here's a story where he's reminding Joshua that Moses was talking to God about Caleb. That's what he says. You know the thing that the Lord said to Moses, the man of God, concerning me? I said, wow. I said, what a story. In Kadesh Barnea, he says, I was 40 years old when Moses, the servant of the Lord, sent me from Kadesh Barnea to spy out the land, and I brought the word again, and it was in my heart. He said, when I gave him the report, I believed everything I said. He said I was excited. I was looking forward to it. It was in my heart. I wanted to go in and take the land. Nevertheless, my brethren that went with me made the heart of the people melt, but I wholly followed the Lord my God. And he's saying this 45 years later. He said, Moses swore on that day, saying, surely the land where your feet have trodden shall be your inheritance. Said, where you were, God says, I'm going to give you that land. Now he's reminding Joshua 45 years later, and your children forever, because you have wholly followed the Lord my God. God calls Moses and says, hey, listen, Moses, see Caleb, see the land he's walking on? I want you to give that land to him. Now go tell Joshua. So now here's Caleb saying, listen, remember that conversation 45 years ago? So God gives us 4 points. Let's build on that. He lived outside the safe zone. By the time we read Joshua 14, 45 years have transpired since Numbers chapter 13 and 14. Through all of those years, his enthusiasm for God had not dimmed. Now, when you read God's holy word today, are you still as excited as you were back then? And I'm telling you, as you can probably hear it in my voice today, when I learned this story just a week ago, I got all excited. I had been praying for months, how do I cover what I need to cover for the Spirit of God to be in the people as we move to that promised land? Looking for direction. I've been looking for months on the direction. And I find it on TV through somebody's talking about Caleb in a whole different direction. And I sat there amazed and saying, wow, there's my answer. And I'm saying, how did I not see that? It wasn't time. The time is now. All these years, his enthusiasm for God had not dimmed. When you read God's holy word, today it's got to be as fresh and as exciting as it was from the day that God called you. God says, go back to your first love. The knowledge isn't going to bring you into the kingdom. It's your love of God, your enthusiasm from him, your trust, your faith to drive you to do what you need to do it right. Not to live off your own passions and your own lusts, but to trust God. So here's the 4 points. 1, risk takers stay exuberant about their lives. Look at Clayton, comes in every Saturday. He says, did you bring your joy? I'm going to bring in a little thing that says joy one day, and I'm going to put it up there and say, I brought my joy. And you can have it. Exuberant. Exuberant refers to the quality of a high spiritness and the energetic nature. There's got to be a quality and zeal inside you for God. Joshua 14, 10 and 11. He says, and now behold, the Lord has kept me alive, he says, these 45 years. Ever since the Lord spoke his word to Moses, and while the children of Israel wandered in the wilderness, and now, lo, I am this day 85. He said, I'm 85 years old now. And yet I'm as strong this day as I was in the day that Moses sent me in. He says, I'm as excited today, I'm as strong as I ever was. 45 years later, and even so, my strength now for war to go both in and to come out. It's 45 years ago. 2, the risk takers stay excited about their future. Are you excited about your calling? This is important. You see, when I look at our work today, I think we're just in the beginning of the work of God. I'll tell you another story, because I think I got enough time. Is that back in the early 90s, the church has started to use me to go into different areas in the field to help serve those congregations to get them ready for growth. So I was doing a personal appearance campaign up in Huntsville, Alabama at the time. And my prayers was, I mean, I'm on a plane, it's like 6 a.m., and I'm watching the sun come up at 35,000 feet. I said, this is great, going to serve God. I get out there and my prayer was, bring at least one new person. I didn't expect numbers. I don't expect huge, powerful numbers. You know, I know there's churches got 30,000 people, 50,000 people. I was praying that God bring one new person. So I got with the congregation. I met with them. We visited for a little while. Then a few minutes before church, and I'm out on the deck, and the pastor comes out, and I said, is there anybody here new today? And he says, no, not yet. He said, we're all regular members. I said, okay, I'll be in a couple minutes. So I prayed again. I was praying. And while I was praying, just minutes before services started, here come this elderly guy around the building. And I said, well, welcome to church. I said, you're a member here? He said, nope, this is my first time. And God answered my prayer. And he said, but I've been following for about 40 years. I said, 40 years and you just came today? I said, what took you so long? He says, well, I got a letter. No one ever asked me before this to come. And so he came in, and I thank God, and I went in. We had one new person. And so here we are to be excited. I'm watching people sitting here today weren't here last year. That's exciting. Hopefully next year we'll fill up more of these seats. Because, see, God's calling people for the end time to be ready for what's coming. Excited means filled with enthusiasm, energy, and eagerness. And I'm telling the speakers, when you speak, you need to feel and deliver those messages today with enthusiasm and excitement. Just don't get up here and say, and she began to flake small boats. Your job is those spies, is to feel hope in the audience of the people who are watching. You need to go to God and deliver your messages with enthusiasm, with excitement, with power. Get away from your notes. Reach to God and let Him deliver your message. Get away from your notes. I told Lord I brought more notes today than I have. I said, I hate using these notes because I get lost in them. I do. I forget. I get lost in them. Sometimes I even forget I even got them. That's what our job is. Those spies were to go back and feel excitement into the people's lives so they can move into the promised land. What did they do? They took their hope away from them, and they all died. That's not our job. Risk takers, verses 12 and 13. Now, therefore, give me this mountain where the Lord spoke in the day that you heard it. Look what he's saying now. Now, therefore, give me this mountain. That was what he said. God said to Moses 45 years ago. I'm going to give you this land that you're on. He says, for you heard in that day how the Anakims were there. Now, we talked about that earlier, where the Anakims were, remember? And that the cities there were great, and they were fenced, so that the Lord would be with me. Then I shall be able to drive them out, as the Lord had said. Then Joshua blessed him and gave to Caleb the son of Jephunneh Hebron for an inheritance. Remember at the beginning of this sermon I said, keep in mind Hebron. Why did keep it in mind? Because that was the land that God was going to give Caleb. The richest, most bountiful land in the area. It was going to go to Caleb. God made sure that Joshua knew it because he gave it to Moses and Moses told Joshua. And here is Caleb saying, remember 45 years ago, that conversation? This mountain right here? He said, God gave me this land. Talk about the patience of Caleb. 45 years he waited for that. All right, let's go on. The giants were there. This was the most deadly area to conquer. Caleb had just asked for the toughest assignment of the conquest of the land of the promised land. He said, give me the toughest job. It was the same land that God gave to Abraham. So when he moved in where he was going to live with his family, he was going to live in the ancestral land that God had given to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. And he trusted God, and he was patient, and he was fearless. And he says, okay, now I want that land, and we're going to go take that land. The toughest assignment there was. The risk takers stay enthusiastic. 45 years later, he was unabated in God's Spirit about their assignment. His enthusiasm meant to be intense and eager. Intense and eager. Verses 14 and 15. Hebron, therefore, became the inheritance of Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, the Kenizzite, unto this day, because he wholly followed the Lord God of Israel. And the name of Hebron before was Kirjath-Haborth, which Arba, which was the great man among the Anakims, and the land had rest from war. It was the last piece of land to be conquered. Everybody else had their inheritance, and the land was given, except this one land that nobody wanted to touch because of the giants. And he went in and took it. And he waited till it was last, and now there was peace in the land. So I began thinking of that 144,000. I said, you know, it's possible. If we trust God, he's going to give us a job that's unbelievable to be able to serve at the throne of God. I can't imagine what that's like. But you know, that possibility is there. When you read Revelation 14 and you read Revelation 7, I mean, those two correspond with one another. All right, now, for 4. Risk takers stay energized about their God. We need to stay energetic about what we do. Only the energy of God can keep us so engaged. We're not going to have the freedom to be wore out. The time of the wearing down of the saints, we don't have that freedom to be wore out. It is the time that's going to wear it out, because God also says Satan is going to overcome us. At some point in time, even though we hold fast, we trust God, God's going to allow some of us, not all of us, to be overtaken. Doesn't mean we lost the battle. That means we won the victory. We won the victory. So God summarizes Caleb's life in just about 30 verses in the Bible. Did you know all that was there? I wish I could say I did, but I didn't know that a week ago. So I began going through some of that today. And in it, God has summed up Caleb's success in just 6 verses. Let me give you those real quick. We begin to wrap it up. Numbers 14:24. I got it highlighted what I want to read, and rather than go through all the scriptures, and you can go back when you get this sermon, go through those scriptures, and you can read them. Numbers 14:24, Caleb followed me fully. Numbers 32, verses 11 and 12, says, Joshua the son of Nun says, for they have wholly followed the Lord. Joshua and Caleb. The third verse, Deuteronomy 1, verse 35 and 36. In verse 36 it says, because he hath wholly followed the Lord. He didn't just half-heartedly do it. He wholly, every one of these verses says he wholly followed me. Number 4, Joshua 14:14. He wholly followed the Lord God of Israel. Every time God talks about Caleb in his example for you and I, he says it every time. He wholly followed me. He put everything into it. He never held back anything. Number 5, Joshua 14, verse 8. In what he says, but I wholly followed the Lord my God. And 6, Joshua 14, verse 9. And God says, and Moses swore on that day, saying, surely the land wherewith your feet have trodden shall be thine inheritance and your children's forever, because you wholly followed the Lord my God. If you want to be a Caleb, if you want that spirit of Caleb, you're going to have to do what Caleb did. You're going to have to trust God, and you're going to have to wholly follow the Lord. Looking for the Calebs today, in Ezekiel 22, verses 29 and 30. So the people of Israel of the land have used oppression and have exercised robbery, have vexed the poor and the needy, yea, they have oppressed the stranger wrongfully. Sounds like an indictment of our nation. And God says, in that time, Ezekiel was a prophet to the end-time generation because Israel had already gone into captivity. I sought for a man among them that should make up the hedge to stand in the gap before me for the land, that I should not destroy it, but I found none. That is a warning, and that is an indictment for the end-time children of Israel. So there we have the spirit of Caleb. It's a legacy of courage, because my servant Caleb had a different spirit and followed me wholeheartedly. If we're going to make it to the kingdom, if we're going to have the spirit of Caleb to be able to serve our family, our loved ones down the road, and all of those that's going to call into the faith, we're going to have the spirit of Caleb. And that, God says, is a different spirit. That is the spirit of God.